Apartheid laws were falling, but wounds remained open. Townships flared. The economy was strangled. Millions were angry, and justifiably so. Mandela was expected to be a healer, a bridge between fury and future. He sat across from F.W. de Klerk, the last white president, and negotiated peace, not revenge. There were calls for justice, land, reparations, but Mandela stayed at the table. He swallowed offense, shook hands with those who once jailed him. Why? Because civil war was the alternative. Welcome to Omar's Story Nook, where history gets spicy, legends get a remix, and imagination runs wild. Every tale you hear is a whisper of Omar, echoing across time, truth, and memory. This is not the Mandela on the postage stamp, not the smiling elder or the bronze statue outside Parliament. This is Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, the man who walked into history with fire in his chest and walked out carrying the burden of a fractured nation. Before the applause, there were iron bars. There was betrayal, exile, silence. There were 27 years behind the prison wall, not for crime, but for daring to say Black South Africans deserve dignity and a vote. Mandela wasn't born a saint. He became a strategist, a rebel, a lawyer with a poet's soul. He knew freedom doesn't come from matches alone. It demands patience, pain, and sacrifice. Let us see him, not just celebrate him. Let us remember that every historic piece has a price. This is the man, the movement, the cost. He was born Rolihlahla, troublemaker, a barefoot boy in Mvezo, raised among cattle, stories, and the rolling hills of the Transkei. A royal lineage didn't mean luxury. He fetched water, listened by firelight, and learned that leadership wasn't about power, but wisdom. When his father died, Mandela was sent to live with Chief Jongintaba. There, he wore shoes for the first time. He learned diplomacy. He studied law, and he discovered how the law could be both sword and shield. But Johannesburg exposed him to something colder than poverty: apartheid. Signs said, whites only. Cops humiliated black men in public. It wasn't just racism, it was legal oppression. Mandela joined the African National Congress, inspired by Gandhi's nonviolence, until Sharpeville. Peaceful protest met machine guns. So he helped form Umkhonto we Sizwe, the spear of the nation. Not out of hate, but urgency. Violence wasn't the first option, it was the last door left. He went underground, became a whisperer in his own land, until he was caught, tried, and instead of begging, he declared, I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society, and if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. And with that, the cell door closed behind him. Robben Island, cold, isolated, unforgiving. Mandela spent 18 of his 27 prison years here. His cell was barely big enough to lie down. No mattress, a thin blanket, a bucket toilet. Each day began with marching to a limestone quarry, chipping white rock until the sun seared his eyes. He missed birthdays. He missed his children growing up. His wife Winnie was harassed, jailed, tortured. But Mandela endured. He studied, taught, and refused to call the guards boss. He demanded dignity, not with anger, but discipline. Inmates formed circles, everyone equal. Even in chains, he practiced democracy. He hid pages of Long Walk to Freedom in flower pots, led hunger strikes, organized reading groups. The cell became a classroom. The prisoner became a symbol. Outside, the world started chanting, Free Nelson Mandela. In Soweto, London, Lagos, Paris, the government tried to silence him, But the myth of Mandela was louder than bars. He once said, "I was not born with a hunger to be free. I was born free until I learned my freedom was an illusion, and then I began to hunger." He never broke. He sharpened, and the system that jailed him began to crumble. February 11th, 1990, Mandela walked out. Fist raised, grey-haired, and meat returned to flesh. But freedom wasn't peace. South Africa was burning. Apartheid laws were falling, but wounds remained open. Townships flared. The economy was strangled. Millions were angry, and justifiably so. Mandela was expected to be a healer, a bridge between fury and future. He sat across from F.W. de Klerk, the last white president, and negotiated peace, not revenge. There were calls for justice, land, reparations, but Mandela stayed at the table. He swallowed offense, shook hands with those who once jailed him. Why? Because civil war was the alternative. In 1994, South Africa voted. Millions of black South Africans cast ballots for the first time, and Mandela became president. But he didn't bask in power. He visited his enemies. He wore a Springbok jersey to unite a rugby-loving, divided nation. He did what many couldn't. He forgave. But forgiveness doesn't mean healing. Many felt betrayed, felt that he gave too much, too fast. Land reform stalled, poverty lingered. Still, there was no war. That was Mandela's victory, though it cost him. He once said, "After climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb." He was not perfect, but in a fragile moment, he held the country together with nothing but presence, discipline, and vision. By 1999, Mandela stepped down, gracefully, quietly, a rare thing in world history, but he didn't fade. He became a global elder, advocated for peace, children, HIV awareness. He held babies and presidents, laughed often, that deep, warm laugh, but he also watched. As the ANC began to unravel, corruption crept in, his voice softened, and those in power stopped listening. South Africa was free, but not healed. The land had not been returned. The wealth still unequal. The dream delayed. Still, Mandela showed up. He hugged his enemies. He mentored young leaders because leadership isn't about being worshipped. It's planting seeds you may never live to see bloom. Do not judge me by my success. Judge me by how many times I fell and got back up. Mandela didn't fix everything. He was never meant to. He cracked open the door, passed the baton. And that? History calls him a hero, but heroes bleed too. They falter, get tired, rise again. Mandela led not with thunder, but with a steady flame. Freedom wasn't the destination, it was the walk. And the next one, and the one after that. So when you see his statue, don't just look up. Look around. Are the work still left? Mandela didn't ask to be praised. He asked us to continue. This isn't just history. This is Omar's story, Nook, where truth whispers between the lines and legacy refuses to fade. Nelson Mandela, liberation at a cost. A man, a movement, a promise still becoming.